time a new season of Bridgerton comes out, I notice something very interesting. If you read English-speaking comments, people usually discuss the romance, their favorite couple, or which sibling deserves the next season. But if you open Russian, Polish, Ukrainian, or Serbian discussions, the conversation often starts somewhere else entirely. Why are there so many black nobles? In Russia, there is almost no Afro-Americans or Africans at all. That's why it seems kinda weird. Besides, as historically people with black skin were not noble, watching them as dukes seems really weird for Slavic people, so they cannot overcome this obstacle and understand that it is an alternative reality. At first glance, it looks like the main criticism. Many Western viewers immediately assume it's simply a negative reaction to diverse casting. But after reading these discussions for years, I don't think that's what's really happening. I think the black aristocracy is simply the first thing that tells many Eastern European viewers they're not watching the kind of historical drama they expected. The key word here is expectation. Most of us grew up with period dramas that treated history very seriously. BBC adaptations of Jane Austen, Downton Abbey, Soviet adaptations of War and Peace or Anna Karenina. Of course, none of them were perfectly accurate. Costumes were simplified, dialogue was modernized, and directors always made creative choices. But they all shared one unwritten rule. If a story takes place in the 19th century, it should at least feel like the 19th century. Bridgerton has a completely different goal. It isn't trying to reconstruct Regency England. It's using Regency England as a setting for a modern romantic fantasy. The social rules are modern, the relationships are modern, the emotional conflicts are modern. History isn't the foundation of the story, it's part of the aesthetics. The problem is that many viewers don't realize this immediately. When the first episode begins, everything tells you're about to watch a historical drama. There are grand houses, horse-drawn carriages, ballroom dances, dukes, debutantes, and beautifully recreated Regency costumes. Naturally, many people assume the show is playing by the same rules as every other period drama you have seen before. Then, only a few minutes later, they see black dukes, black ladies, and the Queen Charlotte. For many viewers, that's the exact moment the illusion breaks. It's not necessarily because they object to the costume itself. It's because the show has suddenly changed genres without warning. What looked like historical fiction turns out to be an alternative version of history, and many people don't know that this is exactly what creators intended. I haven't seen people comparing Bridgerton to Game of Thrones, saying if we can accept dragons, why can't we accept black aristocracy? But I don't think that's a fair comparison. Nobody starts watching Game of Thrones believing it's medieval Europe. The rules of that world are established from the very beginning. Bridgerton is different. It looks almost identical to a traditional period drama before quietly revealing that historical accuracy isn't one of its priorities. And once viewers stop trusting the historical setting, they begin questioning everything else. Suddenly, the costumes feel too modern, the music feels out of place, the dialogue sounds like it belongs to the 21st century. Even the romances become harder to take seriously. Ironically, I don't think the black aristocracy is the biggest problem of these viewers. It's simply the first crack in the illusion. Everything else follows from there. Once you realize that Bridgerton is not trying to recreate history, a lot of creative decisions suddenly make sense. The first problem is that many Eastern European viewers never make this shift. They continue judging the show as a historical drama, while the creators are making something much closer to a modern romance in Regency packaging. The costumes are probably the easiest example. If you compare Bridgerton to actual Regency fashion, the difference becomes obvious. Real Regency dresses were relatively simple. The silhouettes were softer, the colors were more restrained, and makeup was subtle. In Bridgerton, almost every outfit is designed to be visually spectacular. The dresses are brighter, the fabrics are richer, the hairstyles are bigger, and sometimes characters look less like 19th century aristocrats and more like they just stepped out the red carpet at the Met Gala. This isn't bad costume design. It's a completely different philosophy of costume design. The dresses aren't trying to teach you what people wore in 1815. They're trying to tell you who the characters are. Every outfit is part of the storytelling. The music works exactly the same way. 1 minute you're watching a ballroom scene, and the next you're listening to Ariana Grande, Billie Eilish, or Taylor Swift, played by a string quartet. Eastern audiences are genuinely familiar with this device. It is called an anachronistic soundtrack, using modern music in a historical setting to create an emotional connection with today's audience. Movies like A Knight's Tale, Marie Antoinette, and even Moulin Rouge use the same idea. But if you've never encountered that storytelling technique, the reaction is often much simpler. Why is there pop music in Regency England? They really say. Again, it's not really about the music itself. It's another reminder that historical authenticity isn't the show's priority. The dialogue follows the same pattern. Characters speak much more like modern people than 19th century aristocrats. They flirt differently. They argue differently. They openly discuss topics that people of their social class would probably never have discussed in the same way. Remember Daphne and Simon, yeah? Even the humor often feels contemporary. Of course, no historical drama uses perfectly authentic dialogue. If it did, most audiences would probably find it exhausting to watch. But Bridgerton goes much further than simply making the language accessible. It deliberately gives its characters a modern voice because it wants modern viewers to recognize themselves in these relationships. Once you notice that pattern, it becomes clear that none of the choices exist in isolation. The costumes, the music, the dialogue, even the casting are all doing exactly the same thing. They are constantly reminding you that this isn't a reconstruction of the past, it's a fantasy inspired by the past. Whether you enjoy that approach or not, it's a matter of a personal taste. But I think many Eastern European viewers spend the entire series expecting historical fiction, while the creators are making something closer to a fairy tale. And if you are expecting one genre while watching another, almost everything will feel slightly off. Once you start looking at Bridgerton this way, you start noticing the same pattern in almost every discussion surrounding the show. Take the intimate scenes. Many Western viewers don't think twice about it. They're simply part of the romance. But for people who grew up watching BBC adaptations of Jane Austen or shows like Downton Abbey, they often feel surprisingly explicit. Traditional period dramas usually build romantic tension through long conversations, restrained emotions, and stealing glances. Bridgerton chooses a much more modern language of intimacy. And for some viewers, that immediately changes the atmosphere of the story. And the same thing is happening with Penelope. When Nicola Coughlan was cast of one of the main romantic heroines, many viewers laughed at this decision, as they couldn't understand it at all. If you read Eastern European comments, you'll often find people saying that Penelope doesn't look like the kind of heroine they're used to seeing in period dramas. It's not really about whether she is beautiful. Most people agree that she is. It's about expectations. Again, for decades, historical romances followed a very specific image of the leading lady, and Bridgerton deliberately moves away from that tradition. Benedict's story created a similar reaction. Many viewers enjoyed exploring his bisexual relationships in the previous seasons, but then felt that his romance with Sophie arrived almost as if those early experiences had never happened. For some fans, it made his emotional journey feel less coherent than the show probably intended. Individually, none of these complaints are unique to Eastern Europe. You will find similar discussions in every country. What's interesting is that they often appear together. The same people who complain about the Blake aristocracy also tend to complain about the costumes, the soundtrack, the intimacy, the dialogue, and the characters. That's because, from their perspective, all of these things point to the same problem. The show doesn't feel historically believable anymore. I don't think either side is wrong. Western audiences generally accepted Bridgerton as a fantasy from the very beginning. For them, history is simply the visual language the show uses to tell a modern love story. Many Eastern European viewers approached it very differently. They expected historical fiction, and instead they got historical fantasy. Those two genres may look almost identical, but they ask the audience to play by completely different roles. And maybe that's why conversations about Bridgerton sometimes feel so strange online. People aren't actually arguing about race, costumes, or pop songs. They are arguing about what kind of story they thought they were watching in the first place. And I'm curious where your line is. Was there anything in Bridgerton that pulled you out of the story? Was it the costume, the costumes, the music, the dialogue, or nothing at all? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. See you in my next videos. Bye bye.